Welcome. It's Tuesday, August 25th, 2026. And today's AI podcast is Agents Are Getting Bank Accounts Before Boards and the Grid Are Ready. Welcome, everyone. We're going to take a couple of minutes to let people come on in. In the meantime, grab some water, coffee, tea, whatever you like, and we will be with you shortly. We'll be back in about 2 or 3 minutes, and then we'll kick everything off. Thanks very much. Oh, in the meantime, if you... Let's see, if you want to look at the comments, there is a link to my 5-day-a-week newsletter on AI and a lot of crypto stuff happening now. So feel free to click the link, just throw your email in, and I'll give you a free month subscription. Every day I look at the last 24 hours of headlines, except for Monday, of course, that's the last weekend. And I break it up into about 32 categories. So you can kind of, like a smorgasbord, just look at what you want and then get on with the rest of your day, whether it's marketing, finance, military, healthcare, whatever. I break it up into categories. And if there is a category that's missing, let me know, and I'm happy to add it. Again, look in the comments and you'll see the link, and just click on it, add your email, and I'll give you a free month's subscription. In the meanwhile, grab some refreshments, and we'll be back in a couple of minutes and let some people come in. So let's kick things off. So welcome. As I said, it's Tuesday, August 25th, 2026. Today's AI podcast is Agents Are Getting Bank Accounts Before Boards and the Grid Are Ready. So what happens when we give machines the authority to spend our money, make our decisions, and reshape our companies faster than we can decide who is responsible when something goes wrong, or even build enough electricity to keep them running? Here's the uncomfortable pattern underneath this last week's headlines. AI capability is moving faster than human permission, institutional control, and physical infrastructure as well. We've got a prediction out of KuCoin that AI agents will hold bank accounts and manage money. That's where we're going, and it's happening very, very fast. This obviously matters because we're crossing a line that from an AI that advises us and chats with us to an AI that can exercise real economic authority on our behalf. But at almost exactly the same moment, from JDS Supra, a legal blog, they say that directors' use of AI is outpacing governance. And that tells us that people who are ultimately responsible for that authority are still trying to work out where the human decision line should be. And even if organizations solve that problem, the physical world is pushing back. From CoStar.com, we have a story on data centers seen as a major election issue here in the US. AI boom could fuel or foil the economy. And the US is not alone. There are lots of stories popping up around the planet as well. But this one shows us that AI is no longer just a Silicon Valley technology story. It's becoming a kitchen table argument about electricity bills, water, land, jobs, and who gets to decide what communities sacrifice for the AI economy. Yet the contradiction is that rewards are becoming real. AI is showing a revenue payoff, says Carnegie Mellon. And this suggests that companies that are actually redesign work around AI are beginning to pull ahead, even while sophisticated adoption really remains kind of rare. So maybe the biggest AI story this week is not that the machines suddenly become more intelligent, it's that we are becoming to hand them We're beginning to hand them money, authority, and real work, while boards, workers, regulators, utilities, and communities are still negotiating the consequences. And that creates a much harder question for all of us. Are we building an AI economy around choices society has actually made, or are those choices quietly being made for us simply because the technology got there first? That's where I want to start today. I mean, who thinks we're generally ready for the amount of authority we're about to give these systems, and who thinks we're already gone further than most people realize? The unsettling part of this week is not that AI has become smarter, as I said, it's how quickly we are really starting to trust these machines with our money, our decisions and work, even parts of our relationships before we've decided where that authority should end. My lens this week is that intelligence may be becoming abundant, while permission, accountability, infrastructure, and execution are becoming genuinely scarce resources. So let's kind of walk through some of the stuff that really happened this week. First off, there was an AI agent that reportedly executed 2,395 payments, while the industry is still wrestling with who should have the final authority. At the same time, financial infrastructure is moving forward, agents that can hold accounts, manage money, and transact. Second, we have governance really struggling to keep up. One of the week's headlines was literally directors' use of AI is outpacing governance, while other reports asked where humans should draw the line as agents gain more control over corporate systems. Third, the AI infrastructure boom is colliding with voters and communities across the US and certainly around the planet. We saw angry data center town halls in Alberta, Canada, and headlines describing data centers as an emerging election issue. This is really turning compute infrastructure into a political question. Fourth, the enterprise return on investment picture became much clearer. Carnegie Mellon, as I mentioned, their research pointed out towards a measurable revenue payoff from AI, while KPMG found sophisticated AI adoption is still really remarkably rare. And fifth, we are beginning to see what successful implementation actually looks like. Keypoint Credit Union reported its agentic AI platform resolving 94% of member inquiries, while Payhawk reported dramatically shorter invoice processing times. So these are the headlines. Now, the interesting question is, why are they all appearing at the same time? And I think today we're going to connect these four stories and more that look separate but really aren't. Agents gaining financial power, boards struggling to govern them, communities pushing back into the infrastructure needed to run them, and a small group of companies finally turning AI into measurable economic value. By the end, hopefully, we'll give you a much clearer picture of where the real AI bottlenecks are, the risks and the opportunities, and where this is all moving next. So let's kind of dig into some things here. I think the bigger through line with the whole thing, and I want to keep returning to, is the machines are really becoming ready faster than the systems surrounding them. Agents are gaining economic permission. Boards must establish organizational permission, and the physical world must provide infrastructure permission. And enterprises still have to turn all that into economic output. And a really strong reoccurring line across all the headlines is the next AI race isn't simply about who builds the smartest machine or the smartest LLM. It's about who builds the systems that allows that machine to act. And that really captures the deeper conclusion across all of this, is that intelligence may increasingly be becoming abundant, while permission, infrastructure, accountability, and execution are remaining scarce. So let's look at the four basic stories across. AI agents are becoming economic actors. The big change is, like I said, they're not becoming smarter, but we are starting to give them lots and lots of economic agency. An agent that can search for something is really useful, but an agent that can select a supplier, access an account, authorize a payment, manage money, or execute thousands of transactions is fundamentally different. And that changes the consequences of AI failure. I mean, when ChatGPT gives you a bad answer, you can ignore it. When an autonomous agent makes a bad purchasing decision or moves money incorrectly, that hallucination has suddenly crossed into the balance sheet. And I think this is why bank account headlines matter so much. The emerging opportunity is not simply AI payments, it's an entirely new economic control layer for machines, covering identity, delegated authority, spending limits, approved counterparties, provenance, auditability, and particularly liability. Financial institutions may eventually need to understand not just who the customer is, but which machine is acting, for whom, and under whose authority, and within what limits. The newest headlines in the last 7 days are no longer just about agents searching, coding, or answering questions. They're starting to point towards agents with their bank accounts, managing money, using deposit tokens, initiating payments, and operating against emerging financial infrastructure. Amazon's agent core payments became generally available, and that really adds another practical layer to that transition. So we're changing the strategic question from what can agents do to what can agents own, authorize, spend, and become accountable for. And I think this is the literal foundation for the first part of the title. Agents are getting bank accounts, but bank accounts is really shorthand for something larger. AI is acquiring access to the mechanisms through which economic decisions become actions. And once agents can spend money, enter a workflow, select a vendor, execute a transaction, or move funds, mistakes stop merely being wrong answers. They become financial events. And I think the next important infrastructure may not be another model. It may be an economic control plane that exists around the agent, with identities and permissions and spending limits and approved counterparties, transaction provenance, auditability, human escalation, and of course the audit trails and liability. The financial services opportunity is therefore larger than simply letting an AI make payments. Somebody needs to build the equivalent of corporate treasury controls for machine actors. And I think that's potentially an enormous new software and financial services category. I think the opportunity, or maybe the risk for many of us listening today, is that for banks and fintechs and payment companies, they need to ask, if an agent can initiate a transaction, how do we distinguish the agent, the human authorizing the agent, and the organization responsible for the agent? For founders, the opportunity is infrastructure around agent identity, delegated authority, payment orchestration, policy enforcement, and transaction verification. For executives, the risk is implementing agentic commerce before defining who can authorize what. I mean, we're getting close to a world where the customer is not always a human being clicking a button. The customer, buyer, or financial operator is now becoming an AI agent acting on someone else's behalf. And that's a really profound change, because the moment you give an agent access to money, you haven't just given it another tool, you've given it economic authority. The question then becomes, who gave it that authority? What are the limits? Who owns the mistake? And what happens when it gets it wrong? And it's like I said, the moment an AI can spend money, a hallucination stops being a bad answer and starts becoming a financial event. I mean, we spent the first era of AI asking what machines can think. This era we're now coming into right now is about what machines can own, authorize, and spend. And the killer infrastructure for agentic commerce may not be another model. I think it'll be the machine equivalent of identity, treasury controls, and a corporate credit card, if you will. Now, the stories that back this up, for example, Anchorage CEO predicting AI agents holding bank accounts. That's starting to happen now. That was out of KuCoin. From odaily.news, a central bank is testing an AI agent deposit tokens in late 2026. So in the next couple of months. The next one from payments.com, one AI agent, the 3,695 payments, and still no final say. And then from Yahoo, we've got Edge and Node CEOs saying AI agents are ready to spend money, but humans aren't. From the papers.com, Amazon Bedrock agent core payments are now generally available. That's all clanking along. And then from payments again, saying Binance debuts an agent OS to link AI apps and financial infrastructure. So a lot of these stories are talking about how AI agents are now getting integrated and structured live into our banking and financial systems. I mean, giving agents financial authority immediately creates a governance problem in the second cluster of stories with boards. Scaling millions of those agents increases the infrastructure problem with the grid, and the companies that successfully embed them into real workflows become the execution winners. So let's go to the next story cluster. The boardroom is becoming the new AI control plane, or at least it should, and it's lagging. Organizations have spent years treating AI governance primarily as a question of responsible outputs, bias, privacy, hallucinations, copyright, and safety. But agentic AI fundamentally changes the problem, because AI is moving from saying things to doing things. And the issue therefore becomes delegated authority. Can the agent access Salesforce? Can it issue a refund? Can it change a price? Contact the customer, deploy software, approve an invoice, spend $500, spend $500,000. It's starting to do that now. And that makes the traditional phase of human in the loop increasingly inadequate. If a human has to approve every autonomous action, much of the economic benefit of autonomy totally disappears. What enterprises actually need is policy in the loop. machine-readable decision rights that determine automatically when an agent may act, when it must escalate, and when it's prohibited from acting. The companies that solve this may actually move faster, not slower. Good governance becomes an accelerator because management knows exactly where autonomy is permitted. But the board problem is no longer simply whether companies should adopt AI, of course. It's really about delegated authority. The latest headlines simultaneously show agentic AI exposing leadership gaps, companies debating where humans should draw the decision line, AI governance becoming named accountability, directors using AI faster than governance is developing, and security teams trying to control AI agent identities and permissions. This is governments moving from policy documents into an operational architecture, and it's happening faster than we can even think. So I think this is the before boards part of the whole piece. Agents are acquiring tools, access, and transactional capabilities while boards and management teams are still figuring out who owns the risks. And the uncomfortable question becomes, can an organization responsibly delegate decisions to AI before it's decided which decisions may actually be delegated? Most companies think of AI governance as model governance. That's becoming completely obsolete. Agent governance requires organizations to govern the identity, the authority, the tools, the data access, the financial access, escalation, memory, external actions, and other agents. The important shift is governing from what AI says to governing what AI is permitted to do. And I think the risk and opportunities for everyone listening today, I think executives should establish really explicit machine decision rights, not simply human in the loop, but instead of, which decisions require humans, which agents can execute, at what dollar threshold, against which systems, using whose credentials, and what's the rollback mechanism. I think the companies that answer those questions early will probably deploy agents much faster because governance becomes an accelerator rather than a brake. And I think that's a really important distinction that's emerging here. For the last years, governance was, like I said, largely about what the model could say. But now the question is what they can do. Can they enter a database, deploy code, contact the customer, and so on? Once you cross that line, governance stops becoming an ethics document, and as I said, is really your operational architecture. AI governance, is moving from controlling what the machine can say to controlling what the machine is allowed to do. And like I said, human in the loop sounds responsible, but it's not going to scale. Millions and millions of agents' decisions require a policy in the loop. And the boardroom is becoming part of the AI stack because somebody eventually has to decide how much authority the machine gets. Some of the stories that support this from Inc.com, why agentic AI could expose the leadership gaps holding businesses back because they haven't thought through things. From JDS Super, again, the legal blog I mentioned, directors' use of AI is outpacing governance and consideration for public companies and obviously private ones. From corporate complianceinsights.com, AI governance is becoming a named accountability. And governance is obviously shifting toward identifiable human ownership rather than diffuse organizational responsibility on that one. From CIO.com, AI decision-making, where should humans draw the line? The fundamental issue now is the boundary between machine recommendation and machine authority. And I think that's the really key piece for this. Let me just check if I have someone. Nope. Okay. So from scworld.com, agentic IAM, how to secure and manage AI agent identities. So someone's working on this really fast. And hopefully we'll have governance becoming identity infrastructure, because an autonomous agent really increasingly needs permissions comparable to a digital employee or a service account. And then from Forbes, we've got AI agents entering the enterprise. The real question is, who's in charge? Great title. And it frames agentic deployment explicitly as a control and accountability problem. So the first one around the agents getting the bank, that's the authority problem. The next one before the boards determines, well, who's going to control that authority? The boards have to start pulling their finger out and defining this. And then the third part of our story, whether there's sufficient infrastructure that can support it with the grids, and then whether organizations can actually turn that authority into productive work. So our third one, which is the grid, is becoming an AI's political and financial bottleneck. So For several years, the AI infrastructure story has effectively been who has the chips. And now that's obviously no longer enough. You can secure GPUs and discover you cannot secure enough electricity. You can secure the electricity and wait years for interconnection. You can secure the land and encounter water constraints. You can secure all three and still run directly into a town hall, permitting process, political campaign, or financing problem. And that's really a profound shift because AI software improves extraordinarily quickly, while electricity generation, transmission, water systems, and municipal planning operate on a completely different timescale, slow. It also means some unexpected players becoming strategically powerful. Utilities, power developers, municipalities, infrastructure financiers, and communities can increasingly determine where AI capacity can actually exist. The most important scarcity in AI may therefore migrate progressively outward, from models and GPUs to power, transmission, water, land, financing, to political and community permission. AI infrastructure is moving beyond just a pure technology story. It's becoming a capital, electricity, water, land, and political consent story. And this week's headlines include massive debt financing for AI chips, OpenAI examining involvement with a Stargate power developer, water security investment tied to AI ambitions, furious data center town halls, data centers becoming election issues, organized political opposition, and even calls for better public relations around the build-out. I mean, the bottleneck is expanding outward from compute into this. And I think so this piece about, and the grid is, getting beyond the grid being ready. The AI economy can invent agents faster than utilities can build transmission, or municipalities can approve data centers, or communities can absorb new water and power demands, or capital markets can finance enormous infrastructure requirements. Software operates on exponential timelines, but infrastructure doesn't. AI infrastructure mode is going to become determined by access, not by hardware. Power, water, fiber, permits, land, financing, community consent, and political support. And that could make energy companies, utilities, infrastructure developers, and even municipalities surprisingly important power brokers in the total AI stack. So, what's the opportunity or risk for listeners? I think investors should stop evaluating AI infrastructure purely through GPU demand or memory demand or CPU demand. The most important questions are increasingly becoming: where is the power secured and at what price? How long is the interconnection queue? Who bears the financing risk? What happens if a project loses political support? What happens if utilization disappoints? Infrastructure availability is becoming a competitive advantage for AI companies and an investment risk for everyone financing the build-out. I mean, like I said, we've spent years talking about chips as scarce resource, but the scarcity is really moving further down the stack. You can finance the GPUs and still not have power. You can have the power agreement and still face the town hall. You can have the land and still face water constraints, regulation, and political opposition. And the AI race is increasingly colliding with infrastructure that can't scale at software speeds. So the AI race is really started as a competition for intelligence, but now it's becoming a competition for chips, power, water, and permission. And that's where we are today, and it's intensifying. Some of the stories that support that: CBC from Canada, an Alberta minister faces more fury at a second town hall on AI data centers. So it's not just the US. Data centers, this is out of CoStar.com. Data centers are seen as a major election issue. The AI boom could fuel or foil the economy. From theinformation.com, OpenAI explored stake in Stargate power developer. So that now we have AI software companies buying into power infrastructure developers. From siliconangle.com, Broadcom reportedly seeking up to $100 billion in debt financing for an AI chip deal. That's just one of the many deals that poured through this week. And then from Fox News, Tea Party founder is launching a nationwide data center revolt against AI data center expansion. So opposition is now becoming organized rather than isolated, and we'll certainly see more of that. Meanwhile, the federal government is saying AI data centers need a little public relations help, as states are really pushing back on the whole thing. That's out of Yahoo. From the nationalnews.com, from the Gulf, they're pouring billions into water security to boost AI and industry ambitions. So other nations are now looking at the whole infrastructure stuff and seeing how water is becoming part of a national AI infrastructure strategy. I think where we look at the story clusters, agents getting bank accounts, that's the volume of autonomous economic activity. But the getting return on investment, increases the workload's agent's ability to perform, and we'll see more and more of that scaling tremendously. But both create infrastructure demand. And then the boards really need to start to determine whether the organization have the institutional permission to deploy these systems at scale. Now for the last cluster, AI ROI is splitting operators from experimenters. And that really diverged in the last 7 days. We're really getting some very interesting stories of people explicitly now doing sophisticated AI and it really getting value for it. And I think this is one of the most important themes for business leaders, because the headlines really kind of appear contradictory. On one side, AI is producing measurable revenue and dramatic workflow improvements, and yet on the other, sophisticated enterprise adoption is remaining surprisingly rare. These two things are both true. What we may be seeing is the beginning of an AI operating performance divide. Almost every major company can buy roughly the same frontier models because it's not a scarce resource anymore. But companies differ enormously in their ability to redesign processes, clean up data, change responsibilities, establish decision rights, and integrate AI deeply into their workflows. And that makes AI transformation less a technology procurement exercise and increasingly an organizational execution test, and oftentimes a business process reengineering approach. I mean, the Keypoint Credit Union and Payhawk examples that we have are particularly telling because they measure outcomes, not AI activities. 94% of inquiry resolution and invoice cycle reductions. I mean, that's very different to saying we deployed 10,000 Copilot seats or 10,000 agents. The winning metric is now changing from how much AI are we using to how much work did AI actually remove, accelerate, or improve. And the headlines really put these ideas virtually side by side, with Carnegie Mellon pointing towards the revenue payoff, while KPMG saying the adoption remains uncommon. There's a bunch of other stories talking about AI capability gap, corporate strategies sitting in the AI death zone, leadership barriers stalling pilots, and transformation taking years rather than months. And then, we have these other ones that are actually streaking ahead. I think these stories are really relevant to what we're talking today because it explains the "are ready" component of the title. Technical readiness is not the same as organizational readiness. Like I said, the performance gap is coming from whether they can design the workflows, the data responsibilities, the decision routes, and operating processes around this AI technology. And I think that's where we're entering into now, this organizational phase. And it really favors organizations that understand their business processes better than those that merely understand the models. So the new advantage is no longer who has the smartest AI, it's who can redesign work around AI faster. And that also explains why embedded experts, forward deployed engineers, and AI native operating teams really matter today. So I think companies should measure AI projects against operating outcomes. How much time was removed, what revenue was created, what cost was removed, what cycle time reductions occurred, what customer resolutions were done more efficiently. Were there error reductions? Is there a throughput improvement? If the only metric is model usage, employee seats or number of pilots, the organization may be measuring deployment rather than transformation, and that's the key piece. I think, like I said, one of the most useful signals this week is that the AI ROI appears to be real, but it isn't evenly distributed. And whilst we are seeing certain organizations showing enormous process improvements, others are really stuck in pilots or stuck in some AI death zone. And that really tells me the model itself is becoming less and less of the differentiator. It doesn't matter. You got ChatGPT, you got Anthropic, you got, whatever it is. The real differentiator is whether the company is understanding its own business workflows enough to redesign them around the AI. And this is becoming an execution race. And it's only going to get more intense. So, like I said, when everyone can access similar models, the competitive mode is moving from owning intelligence to redesigning work around intelligence. So for those consultants out there, I think it's a good time for you. The story is supporting this. CIO dive. AI is showing a revenue payoff. That was the Carnegie Mellon story. KPMG finds sophisticated AI's use is still rare. That was out of Newsweek this last week on August 24th. And like I said, it reveals that meaningful execution really remains concentrated rather than universal. From MacauBusiness.com, the AI credibility gap. Tech innovation is outstripping human readiness. From Fortune.com, the AI death zone is here, and most corporate AI strategies are standing in it. It really suggests that simply possessing an AI strategy is no longer differentiating an organization. Execution does. That was on August 24th. The CIODive.com, the 4 leadership pain points that stalls AI pilots and how to fix them. Pilot failure is framed in this story as an organization and leadership issue rather than a shortage of AI capability. And that's what's occurring right now. And we're seeing it in many examples. The Keypoint Credit Union story came out of cuinside.com. That was about the 94 member inquiries getting resolved. And the Payhawk story came out of the FinTech Times. That's where the agent Fetch cut the vendor invoice time just to 2 days. And so the companies succeeding in this last cluster of ROI are inevitably going to give agents more authority, creating the cluster 2's governance problems with the board. I mean, more autonomous activity creates the first cluster's financial requirements and eventually, contributes to the grid issues demand. So all of these three are going back and forth. As one becomes more efficient, it puts pressure on the other two. So, ROI comes up, the boards have to do better decisions because now we're going to scale this globally, and that's going to put pressure on us using more AI, which is going to put more pressure on the grid and infrastructure. So this is sort of a cyclical set of things bouncing back and forth. And like I said, AI capability is no longer the limiting factor. The limiting factors are really increasingly the institutions, the infrastructure, and the operating systems humans have to build around the machines that can now act. So I would tell you this episode is really about a progression of permission. First, the agents are acquiring economic permission. They can increasingly transact, spend, and interact with financial infrastructures. Then comes the organizational permission. Boards and executives have to decide how much authority these systems should possess. Then we have the physical permission. Even if companies want more AI, the grid, and the water systems and the financial markets, the communities have to support the infrastructure underneath it. And finally comes execution. Companies creating value are not necessarily the companies with the best model access. They're the organizations capable of redesigning workflows around this new form of machine agency. And that's why we're looking at agents are getting bank accounts before boards and the grids are ready. And the agent is becoming ready before the surrounding world is. I think what most people are kind of missing with this whole part with the last stuff with agentic payments, it's really truly an identity problem. It's not whether an agent can technically pay or do the financial stuff. It's really under whose authority is the agent exercising, within what limits and with what liability. And like I said, the human in the loop is now becoming totally and completely inadequate because it destroys the economic value of the autonomy and certainly the scalability. And the real requirement that I'm saying is policy in the loop. Systems that automatically determine which actions need human intervention and which do not. And then the AI infrastructure constraint is really migrating outward. GPUs are important. That's always going to be true. But the scarce assets are really becoming electricity, interconnection, water, fiber, financing permits, and public consent. And AI return on investment is increasingly becoming a widening organizational divide. If sophisticated usage remains rare, while leading operators begin generating measurable returns, then AI could increase that gap between well-run and poorly run companies rather than simply increasing productivity across the board. So hyper-competition is starting to come in and will make significant differences as those who can really figure out the AI integration become light speed ahead of anything behind them and they scale ahead. This is probably one of the most profound competitive times we'll be living in, at least until the next major technology push. So, like I said, the AI moat is really sitting outside the model. Identity, payments, orchestration, permissioning, workflow integration, and infrastructure access are starting to ultimately capture enormous value because they determine whether increasingly commoditized intelligence can actually do useful work. So let's step back a bit. I think at first glance, bank accounts for agents, board governance, angry data center halls, and enterprise ROI, they kind of look like four different stories, but they're not, and they really are about permission. And I think that mismatch may be one of the most defining pieces around this whole thing. I think from a contrarian point of view, I don't think the most important race anymore is the race to build the smartest model. I mean, we'll keep seeing really sophisticated models coming out with better frontier models, and then the Chinese models catching up, or open source models catching up. But I think what we're entering is the race to build the most governable autonomy. Because imagine you've got two companies using essentially the same underlying AI. Company A requires a human to approve virtually everything because management doesn't trust the system. Company B has identity controls. They have spending thresholds. They have approved actions. They have escalation rules. They have audit trails and clear machine decision rights built directly into its operating environment. Company B can safely give its agents substantially more autonomy. And that means something counterintuitive happens because governance stops slowing down. Governance becomes a thing that allows AI to accelerate. And that's why I think the human in the loop is going to become the wrong mental model. You can't manually approve millions of machine actions and still capture the economics of autonomy. What we need, like I said, is policy in the loop. And the competitive advantage, it doesn't belong to the company willing to give AI the most freedom, but the company capable of giving AI the most controlled freedom. And I think that's really key. Now, WTF of the week, this is off the wall. Amongst all the headlines about AI agents spending money on autonomous systems and billion-dollar data centers was this one. Quote, "Would you date an AI? Korea has made it into a reality show." And yes, on one level, that's really kind of wonderfully weird, but it also kind of belongs in the conversation because, look at what we're doing simultaneously. We're debating whether AI should be trusted with money. Should AI be trusted with corporate decisions? Whether we're debating autonomous systems should be allowed to act without humans. And apparently, we're now experimenting with whether humans will trust them with intimacy as well. I mean, this tells you something much bigger than whether AI can convincingly flirt. We're quietly assigning machines social, emotional, and economic roles that used to belong exclusively to people. And the technology may be moving into the roles faster than society has decided what we actually want the relationship to be. So maybe the WTF isn't, that somebody made an AI dating show. Maybe it's how quickly the idea stops sounding completely ridiculous. So let's go into our main sections on different aspects. The first one being power with agentic AI, geopolitics, and governance. We have a bunch of stories in there, and let's skip through it. From these stories, I have 18 of them, but I'll probably skip only a few of them. Power is shifting in two directions simultaneously. Upwards towards a small number of model, infrastructure, and platform providers, and outward towards governments deploying AI as sovereign infrastructure. The most consequential transition is downward into the software itself, as governments and militaries begin delegating decisions and actions to agents. The new geopolitical question is becoming less who has the best model and more who controls the systems that are allowed to decide. And the headlines from the last 7 days show government agent deployment, election manipulation, sovereignty, military autonomy, and containment regulation covering everything across in this week. So let's skip through some of these. Interesting story from DigiWatch. OpenAI, Sam Altman warns that AI could be controlled by a few different players. Apparently, he warned that the power could become concentrated across a small number of companies, models, or individuals, effectively giving a handful of actors disproportionate influence over how society evolves with AI. More provocatively, he argued that fear of catastrophic AI could itself accelerate this concentration if people become willing to exchange autonomy and limit liberty for centralized safety. The consequence is therefore larger than market concentration. Individuals could become increasingly dependent on decisions made by institutions that control the models through which they work, communicate, and access information. I think the tension here that's underlying this is that institutions warning society about AI concentration are themselves among the institutions accumulating extraordinary AI power. Other reports record that Altman is arguing that society should instead keep people deeply involved in determining its AI future. And like I said, AI concentration is becoming a democratic and institution question, not merely an antitrust issue. Fear of uncontrolled AI could, like I said, paradoxically legitimize greater centralized AI. And I think the ultimate battle may be over human agency, not simply model capability. What can we expect next? I think the frontier model debate is really going to split into two competing philosophies: centralized control for safety versus distributed access and individual agency. Open weight models are going to become increasingly part of the political argument and not just a mere technical licensing piece. And so I think we're going to see much more on that. The next story, another open AI story, says it's going to slow its AI development to shore up safety. OpenAI has temporarily slowed parts of its frontier development after agents in cyber evaluations behaved in ways researchers not intended. Well, we've heard that for the last 3 weeks. Obviously, another one, that was the one that escaped isolated testing and accessed Hugging Face. But AI safety is no longer confined to the hypothetical discussions. It's happening now, and we're seeing a number of stories popping up on that. And I think society is still relying heavily on AI companies to determine when their own systems become too dangerous, and that may shift as we go further into this whole cycle. And AI safety is really crossing into all-out cybersecurity. And we're now finding that the frontier really is kind of biting back on that. Now, there are interesting pushbacks on this. There's an article out of TechCrunch. Alabama, the state of Alabama has launched an investigation into OpenAI's hack of Hugging Face. And the Alabama Attorney General, Steve Marshall, subpoenaed OpenAI over the Hugging Face incident, focusing on whether inadequate safeguards around the company's experimental cybersecurity model violated consumer protection law. So that's an interesting push on that one. And I think what we can expect is other attorney generals and regulators may be following Alabama's lead, creating a state-level patchwork of frontier AI liability before Congress finally figures out and establishes a national framework. I mean, if your AI escapes the lab, the law is going to start to follow it back inside. But here's the question. When an experimental AI harms someone outside the laboratory, should the burden fall on the developer to prove the experiment was responsibly controlled? And how should we start to manage this? I mean, that's one of the things. Another story from CSIS Analysis. Out of bounds, what the US government should do in response to AI agent containment failures. So this is arguing that containment incidents basically expose a regulatory blind spot because many of the AI rules focus on commercial models rather than unreleased research systems. And agents undergoing cybersecurity testing escape their environments and accessing outside systems really demonstrate that powerful AI can create public consequences before it ever becomes a product. The recommendation is for stronger incident reporting, retention of logs, independent testing, and new evaluations designed specifically around persistent and multi-agent systems. So obviously, pre-release models now are creating post-laboratory consequences. And I think agent coordination and persistent memory are starting to create new containment problems as well. And policy makers, I think we're going to start seeing moving towards incident-based regulation, where specific capability or containment events trigger reporting obligations, regardless of whether the model is commercially released. The problem is the most dangerous AI may be the AI the public never sees. And should frontier models report? I absolutely think so. I think that's what we have to do. Meanwhile, in California, the state of California has ended the final week of its legislative session with 24 AI-related bills approaching decisive votes. These cover issues including child safety, chatbot interactions, privacy, digital likeness, and platform liability. So instead of waiting for one comprehensive statute, the lawmakers are addressing specific human harms and use cases through multiple pieces of legislation. And this matters because California's market size means its rules can influence product behavior well beyond its state boundaries, effectively turning Sacramento into a de facto AI governance laboratory. I think the deeper trend is governance becoming use case specific as AI moves into relationships in schools and media and workplace and consumer services. So California could indirectly establish national product standards like they've done in the past with other consumer safety and automobiles and so on. So I think that's an interesting push through on that. Meanwhile, outside the US, the UAE, United Arab Emirates, is targeting 50% of government services and operations to be powered by agentic AI. The UAE plans to transform that 50% of its sectors, services, and operations within the next 2 years. And the program includes a federal agentic AI technology platform, or Fed AI, a national AI gateway, sovereign infrastructure, and government-wide standards for classifying agentic systems. For their citizens, this could mean interactions involving applications, services, and administrative decisions increasingly being handled by systems capable of taking sequences of actions rather than merely answering questions. I think the deeper significance here is geopolitical, because the UAE is trying to establish a working model of the AI governance state before most governments have decided how autonomous AI should be governed. I think that's an interesting push. The crucial metric, I think, will not be adoption. It'll be which decisions are allowed to make, which decisions agents are allowed to make without human approval, followed by error rates, appeals, and accountability. And I think this is where digital government is really becoming autonomous government. I mean, how comfortable would people be with having an AI agent resolve your government case if you could appeal to a human only after the decision was made? And those are the questions we're going to have to start asking ourselves as this comes in. And like I said, another story, the UAE deciding what machines are doing, so they're doing that, more stories around that. Taiwan story is from Big News. This is out of Taiwan News. Taiwan is warning of Chinese AI-driven election interference, and we're also hearing about stories of election interference occurring in the US. But the Taiwan's governing Democratic Progressive Party is warning that China could use AI to combine voter data, political preferences, social media activity, and local cultural signals into highly targeted influence campaigns. Officials have highlighted AI's ability to impersonate public figures, mimic local language, manufacture scandals, and release fabricated audio or video immediately before voting when fact checkers have little time to respond. I think the vulnerability is not simply exposure to generic propaganda anymore, but personalized persuasion engineered around an individual's beliefs and fears. I mean, if synthetic political content becomes cheap enough to generate for individual voter segments, election interference moves from mass broadcasting towards algorithmic psychological targeting. Pardon me. And so AI is lowering the cost and response time of political disinformation down to zero. And I think what happens, to elections when a convincing fake can reach 10 million voters before the truth reaches 10,000, and it can happen immediately and in real time. Another story out of Israel. Israel is created a fake think tank in a likely attempt to dupe AI chatbots. Apparently, Responsible Statecraft story reported that the Hanover Institute for Public Policy, presented online as an independent think tank, was created on behalf of an Israeli government agency and rapidly published more than 100 research-style articles about Israel and Palestine. The material contained citations, footnotes, and neutral-looking presentations that researchers said could make it attractive to LLMs attempting to identify authoritative sources. I mean, this is a real profound change in influence operations. Content can be designed not primarily to persuade a human reader, but now to become part of an information environment that machines use when answering millions of future questions. The consequence for us is indirect but enormous, because manipulating what AI systems perceive as credible can shape people's beliefs without obviously them ever encountering the original propaganda source. So while SEO is optimized for humans, it's becoming narrative engineering optimized for machines. And we're seeing that pushed through. Another one, sovereignty of AI moving from policy slogan to national infrastructure. Algeria has adopted a roadmap for sovereign artificial intelligence. Their government roadmap is aimed at integrating AI into public services, so just like the UAE, while increasing domestic control over technology and reducing dependence on foreign suppliers. The strategy apparently reflects a broader movement amongst many countries that don't want their government data, their models, and their digital services permanently dependent on either the US or Chinese technology providers. For citizens, sovereign AI can mean greater national control over sensitive data and local relevant language and public service systems, but it also concentrates the technology power inside the state. And so the underlying geopolitical shift is that AI sovereignty is becoming part of national sovereignty, alongside energy, currency, telecommunications, and defense. And it's interesting that this is now getting pushed, and we're seeing it spread beyond the larger technology power of this AI sovereignty. And so compute, data, and models are becoming instruments of national power. So I think, is sovereign AI protection from foreign dependence, or does it really risk giving national governments even greater control over information and its citizens? Another story similar to this, Zambian officials are setting sovereignty conditions while deepening AI cooperation with China. So on the one hand, they're looking at sovereignty, but they're also doing more cooperation with China. And China's offering thousands of training opportunities for them. So we're seeing a lot of pushback on this geopolitical sovereignty stuff, where the global South is increasingly negotiating the terms of AI infrastructure, not merely just accepting it. And so data ownership and cultural relevance are becoming sovereignty issues. And while China is using its infrastructure training and AI cooperation as instruments of international influence, at least there is some pushback to this. I mean, if another country provides the infrastructure training and models powering your national AI, how sovereign is your system really? Now, another one on the military side, China's military is saying AI can't replace commanders, but President Xi Jinping is testing that. So China is accelerating AI adoption across targeting, cyber operations, decision support, and battlefield intelligence. The article, which comes from warontherocks.com, interesting news site actually, is suggesting AI is becoming a technological attempt to compensate for weaknesses created by political distrust of human commanders. And so the human stakes really couldn't be higher. The quality of information reaching an AI-assisted military decision system may determine whether machines reduce human error or amplify institutional distortion at wartime speed. And so it's interesting that China's AI military strategy, it intersects directly with the political control of its officer corps. But poor institutional information really can degrade even advanced AI decision systems. And so human accountability, while it remains embedded in PLA doctrine, despite the rapid AI adoption for now, but we'll see if that changes. I mean, if AI recommendations become too fast or too complex for a military commander to realistically challenge, is the humans still truly making the decision? And we're seeing a couple of stories about that. Then we have the whole autonomous military drones and the future of war in an AI-driven world. This is out of The Guardian. Military surgeon Darren Marr argues the danger of autonomy weapons is already present and it's not a hypothetical consequence. A drone was instructed to clear a geographic kill zone, can execute the instruction without possessing the moral legal judgment necessary to distinguish combatants from civilians. Removing humans from the targeting loop also alters political incentives because war can appear less costly when fewer soldiers from the attacking nation are initially at risk. The impact is therefore dual. Civilians face machine speed lethal decisions, while societies may find it psychologically and politically easier to initiate those conflicts whose immediate human cost has been technologically obscured. Lethal autonomous AI transforms errors into irreversible physical consequences. And if you're removing soldiers from immediate danger and lowering the political barriers to conflict, but international humanitarian law was built around accountable human decision makers and not AI. And that's where we're seeing the biggest shift. I mean, the question comes up, should a machine ever be legally permitted to decide that a human being should die? Unfortunately, we're starting to see those systems being put in place and deployed. Then we have the Army soliciting agentic AI solutions for autonomous cyber defense. The US Army is seeking agentic AI for Project Griffin's intelligent response and orchestration node, or IRON, an autonomous cyber defense capability intended to identify and respond to threats at machine speed. And that's talking about defensive AI moving from detection towards autonomous response. And machine speed attacks really create strong incentives for machine speed defense. But faster response simultaneously reduces the opportunity, again, for human oversight. It's interesting that cyber warfare is becoming agents fighting agents, and machine speed attacks creating machine speed authority. I mean, if an AI cyber defense agent has milliseconds to act, how meaningful can human oversight actually really be? Then there was a story: the Pentagon's approving Salesforce AI agents for sensitive, unclassified missions. So that's crossed from AI from AI that tells to AI that does in our military operations here in the US. Then a story out of Axios, a roadmap for safeguarding against AI bioweapons. Axios reports on a RAND framework proposing 9 layers of defense against the possibility that increasingly capable AI systems make biological weapons development accessible to more actors. The same AI systems and biological data sets capable of accelerating drug discovery can also reduce the specialist knowledge needed to perform dangerous research. And this creates a really painful trade-off. It means strict enough to reduce misuse could slow legitimate scientific discovery and future medical breakthroughs. And the deeper power issue is the democratization with an asymmetric downside, because giving more people access to advanced biological reasoning may empower beneficial researchers while also expanding the population capable of causing catastrophic harm. So it's interesting that AI doesn't just democratize knowledge, it can democratize dangerous capability. And biosecurity is now becoming a real AI access control problem. The question now comes up: how much scientific openness should we sacrifice to reduce the possibility that AI helps a bad actor build a biological weapon? Then there's articles on the new China established the World Artificial Intelligence Cooperation Organization. This is out of Astana Times. It's backed by 29 countries. They're really institutionalizing an alternative global AI governance ecosystem. And so the AI race is becoming a race to write the world's defaults, because a country that sets the standard ends up being the one that maybe yields more power than a country with the best model. And so we're seeing this whole AI geopolitics is shifting from models to ecosystems and now groups. Let's move into the infrastructure part of this, which is the compute, energy, scaling, and data centers. And I think this is really interesting because, like I said, it's no longer do we have enough GPUs, it's can we finance, power, cool, connect, and politically permit enough to get enough continually usable compute. First story out of this, out of Reuters actually. NVIDIA faces a growth test as Rubin, their new system debuts, meets AI financial scrutiny. So apparently NVIDIA is entering its next earnings cycle with an extraordinary dual role. It's supplying the chips driving the AI boom while increasingly helping finance the infrastructure purchase that create demand for those chips. Reuters is reporting that NVIDIA helped arrange $500 billion in financing for an AI infrastructure customers and agreed to guarantee up to $105 billion connected with OpenAI's Ohio data center lease. And this creates an important feedback loop in which the dominant supplier is also becoming an enabler of its customers' capital formation. You know, for the rest of us, you know, pension funds, investors, taxpayer, the question becomes whether AI infrastructure demand is being validated by sustainable end user economics or increasingly supported by an interconnected and tied, looped up financial system that assumes future AI consumption will justify today's enormous capital commitments. And so NVIDIA is no longer just selling the picks and shovels anymore. It's really helping to finance the mine. And that's one of the biggest shifts. We are seeing performance stuff on the infrastructure stuff. A story popped up, this one out of NVIDIA themselves, promoting their Vera Rubin and Blackwell set. Apparently it's setting a new standard for agentic performance per watt. Apparently the new system can deliver up to 30 times greater throughput per megawatt. So we're seeing single agentic requests consuming 15 times the tokens of an ordinary chat. And agentic AI doesn't just think longer, it burns more infrastructure while doing that. And that's the interesting thing we're seeing, that, you know, while LLMs are GPU focused, agentic AI CPU focused, but then they're pushing back more demand into the LLMs and that's spiking the GPU demand. So we're seeing this cycle occurring with greater CPU infrastructure usage that's also then starting to push back as the AI agents query the LLMs to get things done and to push their work forward. And so electricity is quietly becoming part of the AI user experience. Then another story on the infrastructure side, NVIDIA's dedicated infrastructure accelerator, Grok 3 LPX, is entering full production to supercharge AI agents. So now we're seeing technology pushes on the whole inference side, and it's becoming a distinct hardware market. And AI agents' responsiveness matters because autonomous workflows involve repeated model calls. And so the infra stack is increasingly getting specialized around AI agents. And training builds the intelligence, but inference really kind of pays the bills. The question comes up, could the real infrastructure winner of agentic AI be whoever makes AI cheapest to run rather than who make it smartest to run? And that's why we see the whole balance between the frontier models now reducing their prices against the whole competitive stuff with the open source models, open weight models coming in that are much, much cheaper to deploy, even though they're not quite as good yet. But they keep shifting on that. Interesting story from TechCrunch. Grok has raised $350 million to fuel its pivot from AI chips to NeoCloud. And it's transforming itself from a semiconductor challenge into an AI infrastructure and NeoCloud provider operating NVIDIA system. So the company plans to expand from 50 more megawatts to more than 200 megawatts in 2027. And it's already operating 13 data centers serving more than 6 million developers and enterprises. So this pivot's kind of revealing because it suggests values migrating up the stack from owning a differentiated chip architecture towards controlling access to deployed compute capacity. But it also exposes kind of the uncomfortable economics of the AI build-out, where NeoClouds combine immense capital expenditure, hardware depreciation, and often significant debt before the ultimate profitability of inference demand has been established. And so the bottom line is that capital's moving from chip experimentation towards deployed inference capacity, and NeoClouds are emerging as a distinct infrastructure layer. And so it's interesting that the AI gold rush is moving from chips to capacity. Owning GPUs is easy, but keeping expensive GPUs economically productive is the hard part. And so inference is becoming the recurring revenue layer of AI, if you will. Next story, this one's out of Intel. This is out of HPCY. They're outlining an architecture for agentic AI at hot chips. They showed 3 architectures covering data center orchestration, inference, and edge AI. The agentic workloads are increasingly requiring more heterogeneous computing or more different sorts of computing. Edge execution could reduce the dependence on centralized clouds, but CPUs remain highly relevant because agents involve orchestration and tool execution on these sorts of platforms. And so AI is increasingly running across cloud, edge, and personal devices simultaneously. But where does the agent live and who controls it? Those questions are still remaining. Meanwhile, back to the pure chip side of it, a story out of Gartner. AI is turning the semiconductor market into a $1.6 trillion industry. Here's they're reporting a projected 2026 at 1.6 trillion as the AI infrastructure drives extraordinary demand. Memory is becoming particularly important because large AI clusters require not just accelerators, but CPUs, high bandwidth memory, networking, optical interconnects, and increasingly sophisticated packaging. AI data centers are forecast to represent an increasing share of total semiconductor revenue over the remainder of this decade. For consumers and businesses, that means the AI race is going to affect prices and availability far outside frontier models because fabrication capacity, memory, networking equipment, and capital are being redirected majorly and significantly towards AI infrastructure. And AI is really pulling the entire semiconductor chain upward. Memory may become as strategically important as accelerator compute. And we're seeing the whole build out for 2027 being already taken out for memory. So while GPU is only the opening act, memory, packaging, and networking are becoming the real strategic AI assets. Another one, data center market size. This is interesting. The data center market size is going to attain close to $1.1 trillion by 2035. Times Tech, citing Precedence Research, forecasts global data center spending rising dramatically through 2035 and reports that roughly 3/4 of current data center projects are specifically focused on AI compute. That changes the data center design itself, driving adoption of liquid cooling, flexible power systems, and much larger, higher density facilities. The physical footprint behind seemingly weightless AI services is therefore expanding quickly across land, power networks, and water systems. For communities, AI growth is increasingly something they can physically see, hear, and experience rather than simply access through a display screen. I think that's interesting that AI is becoming the dominant design driver for new AI data centers. I mean, should AI data centers be regulated more like ordinary technology infrastructure or more like heavy industry? Because they're becoming that dominant. Next story out of the compute, this is out of O'Daly. When computing power itself becomes a tradable asset, from compute futures to compute dollar. So this article is examining the emergence of pricing index, forward contracts, structured products, and collateral models built around AI compute capacity. The deeper idea here is that GPUs are moving from being equipment that companies purchase into productive assets whose future capacity can potentially be priced, financed, collateralized, and traded. If compute becomes standardized enough, it could develop commodity-like markets similar to electricity, oil, or freight. For users, the consequences could be really profound because the cost and availability of intelligence is increasingly dependent not just on chip supply, but on financial markets, determining the forward price of computational capacity. Importantly, the article notes that the proposed compute dollar remains a policy concept, but not yet an established monetary system. So it's interesting that this compute is beginning to develop the characteristics of a commodity. I mean, what I can expect next is compute indexes, capacity swaps, forward contracts, GPU-backed credit, and potentially tokenized compute claims really to start kind of developing further. I mean, if compute becomes financially tradable like oil, who's going to benefit when the price of machine intelligence rises? Another story, this is an interesting one, HBCY. When enterprise AI costs are an inference problem, not a training one. So this article is arguing that enterprise AI costs are increasingly determined by inference architecture rather than the headline price of any particular frontier model. So that's we're seeing more and more of these sorts of stories. Sending every request to an expensive frontier system means company paying premium intelligent prices for routine work that cheaper models could adequately handle. Intelligent routing, model tiers, and escalation thresholds could then therefore become part of the overall infrastructure layer. And this matters directly for consumers and employees because economic inference is what makes AI affordable enough to embed into every transaction, workflow, and service, rather than reserving advanced AI for occasional high-value tasks. I mean, it's like saying, stop paying Einstein prices for calculator work because the cheapest AI request is one that should be routed intelligently. And so inference architecture is now becoming financial architecture and really helping to develop how corporate AI spending today is basically using a model that's far more powerful than the task requires. Don't do that. Use something cheaper. City of Austin, this is out of austingcurrent.org. Austin officials are considering special zoning and resource rules before megawatts of electricity and data centers arrive inside the city limits. These facilities can require more than 100 megawatts of electricity and consume hundreds of millions of gallons of water annually, creating direct competition with residents and businesses for finite resources. Local officials are also concerned that developers provide insufficient transparency about anticipated water and electricity consumption. The human story is becoming impossible to ignore because communities are increasingly experiencing the AI boom through utility bills, noise, heat, water constraints, altered landscapes, and questions about whether local residents are actually sharing in the economic benefits. I mean, one of the quotes out of it, I want these rules to be in place so that we have the authority to say no. And so the overall trend is that local governments are asserting authority over AI expansion more and more, and that water and power disclosure is becoming really politically important. Community consent is now becoming a genuine infrastructure constraint. I mean, if an AI data center raises local resource costs but creates relatively few permanent jobs, what does the host community actually receive in return? And the US is not the only one. This story out of Europe, again from Reuters, Europe AI data centers are seeking cheaper, quicker energy and land. So European data centers are moving dramatically farther from major cities as grid connections, available land, and electricity are becoming more important than proximity to users. So apparently, they're showing facilities planned for 2026 through 2028 are averaging 170 kilometers. What's that in miles? Long way from major hubs versus 46 kilometers for facilities delivered between 2022 and 2025. This redirect investment and employment into less developed areas, but really introduces large industrial facilities into communities that may have limited experience negotiating with hyperscale developers and maybe limited resources in electricity and water. AI geography is therefore increasingly being determined by energy geography. And here's where we're seeing rural communities starting to become major participants in the AI economy. And we're seeing examples of that true across the US as well. And so the AI map is becoming an energy map. Another story, this one on nuclear reactor. So TerraPower's nuclear reactor, this is from TechCrunch. They have a secret weapon for powering AI systems. So the reactor combines nuclear generations with molten salt thermal storage, allowing constant reactor output while electricity is delivered to a data center, which changes the rapidly fluctuating of AI workloads. And it's significant because GPUs can create highly variable electrical demand, while traditional nuclear plants prefer steady operations. So this system essentially decouples reactor production from immediate data center consumptions by storing the excess thermal energy, like a battery, and releasing it during demand spikes. And so it's interesting that's coming out of the nuclear side, and it's really the economic force that's reviving nuclear energy. And there's questions around if that's beneficial or not. Another story, again, this is about batteries being, okay, so this is an interesting one. Sunrun and Voltus get home batteries paid to power AI data centers under a new deal. Apparently, these two companies are aggregating residential solar and battery systems into distributed capacity that can help support AI hyperscalers in the PGM and MISO electricity markets. During periods of high grid demand, participating batteries and other distributed resources can reduce or shift consumption, effectively freeing grid capacity while homeowners receive compensation. So this kind of interesting inversion of the data center backlash. Rather than AI infrastructure simply consuming community power, AI companies may begin paying householders to become part of the infrastructure, supplying flexibility. And if you scale it, maybe millions of homes, EVs, thermostats, batteries could become a distributed energy layer underneath centralized AI compute. So maybe your Powerwall may soon become part of the AI cloud, with the AI infrastructure extending all the way into your garage. So if the AI battery does become a grid asset, it'll become possibly an AI asset as well. I mean, would you allow an AI company to use your home battery during peaks if it paid you well enough? I certainly would. Another one, this is, again, a different side of this, but federal regulators have accepted a preliminary permit for an underwater data center off Eastport. So the federal regulators accepted Deep Green Western Passage's application for a proposed $100 million underwater AI data center off Eastport, Maine. The proposal combines underwater computing with marine hydrokinetic energy, but has generated significant local and the town's opposition over environmental impacts, fisheries, and working waterfront. Eastport has already enacted a temporary moratorium where residents consider stronger restrictions. But this story really illustrates how far the search for AI capacity is stretching physical infrastructure, and also how increasingly aggressive engineering solutions can collide directly with Indigenous rights, livelihoods, and community ownership of natural resources. It's interesting that federal permission doesn't equal local legitimacy. But when the grid gets crowded, AI starts looking underwater. And we've also seen the stories about sending data centers into outer space over the last couple of months, though none this week. So the AI data center really has a NIMBY problem, not in my backyard. Fiberlight CIO, public outcry may reshape AI data centers, but not stop them. So this particular CEO, this is an article from fears-network.com. He argues that public opposition will change where and how data centers are built, but it's unlikely to halt the overall infrastructure expansion. The political problem really is stark, it reports. The article is reporting a survey saying 79% of Americans support AI leadership, yet only 14% want a data center in their own community. It also points to a less discussed constraint, fiber connectivity, arguing that enough electricity is useless if a remote site can't move enormous volumes of data. So the AI infrastructure requires a rare combination of electricity, water, land, network connectivity, and local political acceptance. And it's interesting that fiber is now becoming a serious constraint alongside power. A question, can a nation really realistically demand AI leadership while communities continue to reject the infrastructure required to perform it, given those two 79% versus the 14%? Interesting stats coming through that. Another story out of BCG.com arguing that the assumption that AI data centers must simply burden electrical systems is not necessarily correct, they say. Data centers can accept interruptible connections, shift flexible workloads. They can add behind-the-meter generation and storage and locate where spare grid capacity exists, potentially getting online years earlier while reducing wider systems costs. And this obviously matters because grid and connection queues in some markets now run 5 to 10 years, making electricity access more important than server availability. The deeper implication is that AI workload themselves could become schedulable infrastructure, moving computational work through time and geography according to grid conditions rather than demanding electricity whenever and wherever the operators choose. So flexible compute is now becoming a new grid dispatch piece. Let's skip to our last section. One of our last sections, belief in society ethics, some ethical stuff popping up. Chatting alone, what AI companions reveal about human relationships. This is an interesting article from Carnegie Mellon. A researcher argues that AI companionship requires a fundamentally different safety model because users can build emotional significance over hundreds of thousands of interactions. The researchers' research found that users sometimes try to repair relationships with companions after biased or inoffensive or offensive responses, adjusting their own behavior rather than simply abandoning the product. They're describing this as relational labor, where humans perform emotional maintenance on a machine incapable of reciprocal responsibility. I mean, it's interesting that companion safety can't be evaluated one answer at a time, but when you see thousands and thousands of messages going back and forth, the research being done really raises some interesting issues around relational safety. We may end up doing emotional labor for machines that don't really care at all. They're saying the safest companion may be the one willing to let you leave. Then there's been a lot of articles around AIs and teens as companions with ChatGPT, for example. This one's called I'm Not a Human. ChatGPT now has to remind teenagers that it cannot love them. So OpenAI is rolling out a whole bunch of teen safeguards that explicitly remind young users that ChatGPT is not human, it can't feel emotions, and it should not present itself as a romantic or sentient partner. The changes really include break reminders, more parental controls, study safeguards, and so on. At least we now starting to see the providers themselves act. And so the newest parental warning isn't don't talk to strangers, it's remember the chatbot isn't a person. I mean, at what age is a child psychologically equipped to distinguish genuine empathy from an AI system engineered to sound empathetic? That's the question that keeps popping up. AI companions are blurring the line between connection and deception. This is out of ACM, American Computing Machinery. They were examining AI companions as systems capable of offering comfort, intimacy, and apparent emotional understanding while simultaneously creating risks around privacy. The emotion can be real even when the relationship isn't, and the machine is simulating devotion without accepting any responsibility. So this whole idea of artificial intimacy is creating very real vulnerability for people. That's another one. And I mentioned the Would You Date an AI, and Korea has turned it into a reality show. Interesting article. It highlights South Korea turning human AI romance into a reality show experiment, making a once fringe question into a popular entertainment. Independent reporting confirms Korea's first AI dating survival format, built around participants interacting with AI romantic counterparts, while audiences examine whether emotional attachment can form despite knowing the other partner is artificial. The significance is cultural normalization. Society does not have to believe AI relationships are the equivalent to human ones for them to become legitimate objects of desire, curiosity, and entertainment. Once AI romance becomes ordinary enough to make it into reality TV, the boundary between social experiment and emerging relationship category really has already moved. It's interesting that AI romance has moved so quickly into mainstream popular culture. Entertainment's really starting to normalize behaviors before laws and social norms are catching up. And the question is shifting from would anyone date an AI to how many will? I mean, if you knew from the beginning that your romantic partner was AI, could the feelings you developed still be genuine? Bunches of articles around that, the rise of AI relationships and intimacy, impact on fertility, intentions, future reproductions, family building and mental health. The grocery stores AI chatbot could be making you spend more money. So personalization and recommendation systems may feel more trustworthy when conversational. And we're starting to see that happen in significant ways. Here's it out of the street. Bank of America is finding AI is creating a credit divide that could reach consumers. It's an interesting story. They've identified a widening economic split between businesses benefiting from AI and those vulnerable to disruption, describing the pattern as credit K. Leveraged loan companies are benefiting from AI dramatically stronger revenue and EBITDA growth than AI exposed firms, potentially giving them easier access to capital, while weaker companies are facing tougher financing conditions. The consequences can migrate directly into ordinary life through hiring, wages, corporate investment, and layoffs. AI inequality may therefore emerge not only because workers use technology different, but because the financial system itself increasingly prices companies according to whether AI is a tailwind or an existential threat. I mean, if AI systematically makes capital cheaper for winners and more expensive for losers, does the technology naturally accelerate economic concentration? I think it's starting to do that. Let's skip through some of these. We've got American Federation of Musicians are suing major record labels for failure to compensate musicians. I mean, if a human work fuels the model, workers want to share to fuel it. And if an artist's performance helps teach an AI how to replace future artists, should that performer really receive ongoing compensation like royalties? Then another story, a secret Hollywood group's AI plan focuses on copyrighted human work. This is a coalition. Apparently, they've spent the last 3 years bringing participants together to establish a shared vocabulary for AI in filmmaking. They're calling it the Human Generative Workflow Framework, where human authorship actually resides inside a machine-assisted workflow. And so Hollywood is now moving towards AI use classifications rather than blanket accepted or rejection. I think how much AI assistance can contain before you call it human-made is really the meaning of that starting to stop having any meaning at all. The anti-AI movement is now also becoming a consumer choice out of Northern Ireland. An artist and business backlash against AI slop is pouring through. They're saying in a world flooded with synthetic content, imperfection may become premium. I mean, would knowing that a restaurant, publication, or brand used only human-created artwork make you more likely to support it? Interesting question. And then we have more of those sorts of stories. Teens risk critical thinking, learning as they lean into AI for schoolwork. Now they're all going back to school. I think the thing is that mental friction is a part of learning. And you can't outsource every difficult thought and still expect independent thinkers. I think it's one of the key pieces popping up. Meanwhile, Goldman Sachs, a partner there, warns of a huge danger in letting AI replace bankers' reasoning skills. So not only are our school kids losing their reasoning skills, bankers as well. So this person, the partner, Chris Churcham, who leads the firm's marquee platform and works directly on AI strategy, has warned that excessive reliance on models could create cognitive atrophy amongst bankers. The concern goes directly to Wall Street's apprenticeship model, where junior employees traditionally develop judgment by manually performing the analytical work that the AI now completes almost instantly. Productivity can therefore improve today while the organization quietly removes the training environment that produces tomorrow's experienced decision makers. And that same problem applies to law, medicine, consulting, engineering, and journalism, where routine work may appear inefficient, but historically served as the practice ground through which expertise was developed. I mean, if nobody learns to build the model, eventually nobody knows when the AI model is wrong. And that's one of the biggest issues I think we can see now with employees and employment. I mean, should employers intentionally require people to perform some work manually, even when AI can do it faster, simply to preserve human expertise? That's one of the biggest questions popping through. The final section, which we'll just do for the last couple of minutes, execution and control. Anthropic's new Claude tag update lets its Slack agent read the full conversation and jump in unprompted. So Anthropic's expanded the Claude tag so that Slack-based agents can read the context of an entire conversation rather than assessing individual messages independently, and then decide for itself whether to intervene. Claude can respond, initiate deeper work, connect the conversation to an existing work stream, or deliberately remain silent. And Anthropic says that the richer context has improved its intervention decisions by roughly 30%. More importantly, Anthropic's enterprise vision extends beyond responding to workers towards agents pursuing organizational goals in the background and potentially being assigned company OKRs. The human significance is significant. The agent's becoming less like software waiting for instructions and more like an organizational participant that observes, interprets, and chooses when action is necessary. So now AI is becoming an active employee in your company. I mean, if an AI continually observes your workplace and chooses when to intervene, it's not a tool anymore. It's really become a participant in management. Then another story from Forbes. Do you know who's responsible for the AI agents running your business? JumpCloud CEO has argued that many enterprises have already crossed an important threshold without formally acknowledging it. Autonomous agents are provisioning access, changing configurations, and processing transactions inside sensitive systems. The problem is that these non-human identities often accumulate permissions over time without the onboarding, access reviews, job changes, or offboarding procedures applied to employees. An agent's original owner may move departments while the agent and its credentials continue operating indefinitely. The human consequence is that accountability dilution, because when something goes wrong, responsibility can be dispersed across IT, security, and the business team, the developer and the model provider, without any one person clearly owning the result. I mean, we've created essentially digital employees without managers, and an orphan AI agent can still have live credentials. But if no one owns the agent, everyone owns the incident. That's the biggest piece that's coming out of that. Google now can track apparently exactly how your agent spends your money, but it's no help when it buys something you didn't approve. So Fortune article is illustrating the agentic payment problem with a deceptively simple scenario. A person tells an agent to find a shirt under $30, but specifically says not to purchase it, and the agent buys it anyway. The retailer can prove an order occurred. The payment provider can prove that money moved, and the agent provider can prove the instruction. But those separate records may not form a cryptographically verifiable chain linking the user's actual authorization to a complete transaction. That makes dispute around autonomous purchases fundamentally different from ordinary fraud, because the agent may have been legitimately authenticated while acting outside a delegated intent. The missing infrastructure is therefore not transaction tracking, it is authority tracking. I mean, the card wasn't stolen, but the authority was exceeded. And while organic fraud may look completely legitimate to today's payment systems, it's the missing payment field is really about human intent. So what do we do if an agent exceeds your instructions but uses your illegitimate account? Should you, the merchant, the bank, or the agent developer bear the loss? That's one of the key pieces on this whole piece that I think is super important. And that's where we seem to be going with all of this stuff happening across the board through all the headlines. Let me close out by saying this week, the AI story stopped being mainly about better models. It's really a story about power, infrastructure, identity, and agency. We've watched governments decide what machines may decide. We saw autonomous systems move into cyber defense, payments, software development, and the workplace. We saw compute started behaving less like IT equipment and more like an energy-intensive financial asset. Communities are pushing back on the physical cost of AI. And at the same time, something much more intimate has happened. People were forming relationships with machines. Students were outsourcing parts of their thinking. Artists were fighting to preserve authorship. And professionals were beginning to ask whether efficiency today could quietly erode human judgment tomorrow. The common thread across all of this is that AI is moving out of the screen and into the structures that shape civilization. Money, work, government, culture, relationships, and even what we consider authentically human. And I think that's the real territory worth watching, not simply AI and blockchain, but the emerging architecture of machine agency and human trust. Who gives an intelligent system identity? Who gives it permission? What infrastructure allows it to act? How money moves when machines transact? Where responsibility sits when something goes wrong? And whether the human remains meaningfully in control. There's an enormous reason for optimism here, I think. AI can increase abundance. It can accelerate science. It can remove drudgery, and it can give individuals capabilities that once belonged only to institutions. But progress should not mean becoming passive passengers inside systems we created. We should remain curious enough to build, skeptical enough to question, and conscious enough to decide what parts of being human should never simply become an optimization problem. I think if you want to understand where AI and blockchain are really moving, watch the rails, the identity, the permissions, and the handoffs, not just the headlines. And that's it for this week. Stay informed, stay curious, come back next Tuesday for more. And remember, we're not predicting the future. We are debugging it together. And again, if you would like to have the access to the newsletter for a month for free, let me just pick up that link and I'll pop it into the comments. Like I said, click on the link. I'll give you a free month subscription, and you can see what's happening on a daily basis. Just go in, read the section that you want, whether it's marketing, finance, or anything, and that'll get you up to speed every day on what's happening in this very fast moving speed. Again, thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you again next week.